Good morning. Yeah, as Keith said, I'm Teresa Nelson. I am a PMO practice manager here at RPI Consultants.
And I am Richard Lee Stout, one of the partners of RPI Consultants, focused on our Infor services. Today, we're going to talk a bit about some of the lessons that we've learned participating in many CloudSuite implementations. Where we're at today is the majority of the professional services that we're delivering here at RPI throughout 2022 have been driven by CloudSuite implementation as we've brought dozens of clients, some coming from Lawson, some coming from other systems into the Infor cloud. So we want to talk a bit about what it takes to get to CloudSuite, and then talk about some of the updates and evolution of our implementation methodology to address some of the things that we've been seeing lately. A CloudSuite implementation can be a significant endeavor. Oftentimes these projects are a year or greater. Let's take a look at a sample timeline. Here we have an example of a CloudSuite implementation timeline. You can see it's a traditional waterfall approach to ERP implementation, since we do have a hard cutover at the end. You can see our 5 project phases here that are underpinned by a monitor and control phase throughout. With a project of this size, obviously there are going to be some major challenges, and we've seen a few challenges pop up in just about every project. So I want to talk a bit about some of the things that you should expect to address in your CloudSuite implementation. The first being change resistance. It's a new system that requires a new way of using it, and it takes a lot to get everybody on board with what that change is going to be. The next being the enormous amount of technical work that needs to happen to make your CloudSuite system ready to use and integrated with the rest of your systems and business processes. The amount of transformation that we must apply to your master data and transactional data. And then, of course, the time and resource constraints that are applied to an implementation project that kind of control what we can get done in how long. There are a few surprises that have come up time and time again as well that we want to address today. I think the first one we want to talk about is the amount of downtime it can take to cut over, particularly from Lawson to Infor CloudSuite. It's maybe longer than you might expect, and this really varies from project to project, anywhere from 2 days up to an entire week, depending on the amount of data that's being moved and the sort of the conversion approach that we're taking. I think one of the real drivers behind this amount of downtime is when we're doing a go live, we basically need to take a complete snapshot of the legacy system, of the Lawson system, at which point we can no longer enter new transactions into the old system. And we take that snapshot and we need to convert and transform all of that data into new CloudSuite structures and then upload it to the cloud. And that can take quite a bit of time.
And it's really important to begin planning for that cutover downtime as early in the project as possible. We've run into situations before where we plan a certain cutover date, get closer to the end, and realize that there's a major business activity that needs to happen around the same time. We can't afford to have that sort of downtime, potentially in conflict with it. So it's an important consideration to think about what that timing would look like and plan for that worst case scenario where you are without your production system for up to a week.
Yeah, that's a great point. The next item we want to touch on is a global HR to multi-tenant migration. This applies for those clients that have been running Lawson and then went through an implementation of Global HR, moved their HR system of record to the newer landmark-based application. So the good news is we can take 100% of the data in your global HR system and migrate it up to the Infor cloud. It picks up everything that's in there and all of the history and basically does a lift and shift up to the cloud. The challenge there is, in order to make that work, the source and the target application versions need to be the same. And of course, the target application version, the version of Infor HR Talent deployed in the cloud, is updated every month. For some clients, this might not be that big of a deal. Maybe you're running a fairly recent version of Global HR on-premise. Maybe you're already used to updating it regularly, and there's not going to be a big jump. But for those clients that might not have updated GHR in a couple of years, and for those clients that might have deployed functionality within GHR that's changed significantly in recent updates, such as talent acquisition, this could be a big move. Then another item that seems to come up on every project is the challenge to replacing some of the critical financial reporting needs that our clients rely on within Lawson and other legacy systems with the reports that are available within CloudSuite and using the tools that are available within CloudSuite, which are fairly different than what most of our clients are used to working with. You might have caught a presentation from some of our colleagues this week that they've really dived into this. Know that we've all been working to address this challenge, and that includes Infor as well. Infor has put significant development investment into overcoming this. And then the final surprise I want to touch on is something that actually it's a surprise that some of our clients might not have expected. And that is just a bit of a disconnect sometimes around the level of change that an organization is really prepared for. Oftentimes when we begin working with a client who's ready to move to CloudSuite, we'll meet with an executive team and they'll say, we have decided this is an organizational priority and we're all on board with doing this project. This is important for us. We understand this is going to build the foundation for the next 10 or 20 years here, and we are prioritizing getting all of our business and tech resources aligned and involved with this project. And that's a great sign. We love to hear that. What can be challenging is oftentimes as we get into a project, we find that the end users of the system aren't quite as ready to make that change. And this is something that sometimes has caught our clients' leadership by surprise.
And we do find that it can vary a little bit by how we're approaching this implementation. For example, if we are doing a full CloudSuite, oftentimes that's really driven by either the technical staff, and/or your executive leadership team. And that's where you may run into an end user group that's not as enthusiastic about making this change. Whereas if it's just one particular piece, say we're doing a HCM implementation or a CloudSuite FSM, oftentimes those are identified and driven by those business users as the starting point. And there we sometimes see that disconnect being the opposite, where the business owners are ready and excited for the transformation that this change is going to bring, but maybe the IT staff isn't quite as excited about it because they have all their other work and they're not the drivers behind it. So don't let that surprise you. Plan for it early and be prepared to address that change resistance as part of the implementation.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk a bit about constraints. I think, as I mentioned, this is a significant project, a great endeavor, and of course can introduce a lot of cost to an organization looking to make this move. So let's just talk a bit about some of the things that influence the amount of consulting cost that's required to implement Infor CloudSuite. First and foremost, we have the overall project scope, and what I'm talking about there is the breadth of the application, the number of suites and modules that are in use, as well as the amount of transformation that's happening. So the amount of business process changes, optimization, possibly new module implementation or new processes coming online as part of the project. That's probably the biggest factor in the overall cost. Some of the other factors are the amount of data that we need to bring up to CloudSuite, right? So the conversion scope can play a big part in the overall timeline of the project, the overall cost of the project. And there, whilst master data, think of things like your list of vendors or your HR organizational structure, well, that's really typically not negotiable in terms of moving from Lawson to Infor CloudSuite. The one thing that we can make some choices around is the amount of transactional data and our sort of transactional cutover approach. Are we trying to bring years of submodule history up to Infor CloudSuite and transform that to fit new structures? Or are we taking a clean approach, maybe running out older transactions in the legacy system and just beginning with new transactions in CloudSuite?
Another area is the technical development, and it's in everyone's best interest to be absolutely ruthless with what technical development we categorize as required for go live. Oftentimes what we find is we go into these projects with a very, very long list of RICE items that have been developed over a period of years in the current Lawson environment. And in those initial discussions, everyone feels like most of it's a must-have and it needs to move and be there on day one of go live. As we progress through a project, what we tend to find is a lot of these items that were previously development have functionality in the system that meets the need. It just maybe looks a little different and is approached in a slightly different way. So the earlier that a team can begin to identify that and grasp that and remove items from the scope, the better off we are in terms of controlling our costs, because technical development is one of the largest drivers in the amount of time a project takes, and it can also be something that adds cost down the road as development items maybe get passed to outside resources for development. We see that often, don't we, on projects where we start with the client IT owning a good bit of the testing or the training or the development work, and as we move through, we find that they need support, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're talking about a lot of technical development that needs to happen as part of this project. Obviously, we need developers to power through that. Oftentimes, our clients would like to take on as much development work as possible. Not only does it save costs, it better prepares their internal teams to maintain these development items moving forward. The challenge there is during that period of the build and develop and verify and empower phases, we're asking our client side IT teams to participate heavily in the project with day-to-day things such as assisting with testing rounds and really getting hands-on with issue resolution so they can practice and get prepared to support the system after go live.
Mm-hmm. And what we find is it's not uncommon for us to have a client team own a large amount of technical development work, and then as we get close to the time when it has to be wrapped up, they find they didn't have the time to put in, and that ends up passing to a consulting team. And what happens there is often that will result in a delay of the project and end up being far more expensive than if we had planned and parsed those pieces of development work out from early in the project, brought in the developers early on, and planned for it that way. I'm not going to pretend like this is an easy thing to do, and there is absolutely value to a client's internal team owning development tasks and being the lead on some of those items. I'm more just calling it out to say that this is a discussion worth having with your partner early on in the implementation. Where is it the most strategic for that technical team to be putting their focus at these given phases? And where can it be augmented with additional resources to support this very crucial development effort? The better we do early on planning for that, the better impact it's going to have on cost over the course of the entire project.
Yeah, because any savings from taking on development work internally would be lost several times fold with a significant project extension that came as a late surprise.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, so let's switch gears a bit and talk a bit about how our implementation methodology has evolved to address some of these challenges. The first thing we want to talk about today is the data migration factory. If you don't know, the data migration factory is something that Infor has provided to their client base as a way to expedite moving from Lawson into Infor CloudSuite. It's basically a conversion tool set and a service provided at no charge by Infor to their client base. And what it offers is the ability to migrate a large amount of data from Lawson up to the cloud. What it can do is it can pull data from your Lawson S3, COBOL-based applications, as well as any landmark application extensions you have, such as accounts payable invoice automation or contract management. It can really uplift the entire Lawson ecosystem and combine all of that data, transform it into CloudSuite structures, and bring it online to the cloud. You do have the ability to do some amount of GL remapping as part of this service. However, many of the submodule structures do need to remain as is if you're going down this route. It does allow you to bring forward several years of subledger transaction history, and we're talking about things like within the procurement module, purchase orders, receipts, invoice matching, requisitioning, that sort of thing. And it's really the only way to bring forward some of these data structures, since DMF is able to bypass some of the normal load procedures that we would have for CloudSuite, using the delivered interfaces or spreadsheet uploads. There are some limitations that you should know about. First and foremost, it's not designed to migrate data into a live data area. And what that means is, for example, if you're already live with some portion of Infor CloudSuite and you're trying to complete your migration, maybe you're in a hybrid state, you won't be able to use DMF to, say, complete a payroll implementation if you're already live on Infor HR in the cloud. Some of the other limitations, obviously, it does not provide new module implementation. And there actually is some amount of new functionality that we do typically bring live as part of CloudSuite, particularly in the contract management area within procurement. So since this isn't happening as part of DMF, we usually have some post-conversion steps, maybe doing some additional data loads on top of the DMF. And then finally, the DMF is really designed to expedite moving what you have working in Lawson without too much transformation into the cloud. And it really doesn't allow you to do some things that you might have been looking forward to as part of your Infor CloudSuite journey that might be closer to a re-implementation. So if that's your goal, DMF might not be the best fit for a conversion.
So some things to know as you're considering DMF for an implementation. It typically is 5 passes. You've got 3 passes that are associated with testing rounds. Those provide an opportunity for validation and for some transformation if you need to. But then there are 2 additional passes, one which is a go live practice run and another one which is your actual cutover pass. It's a highly coordinated event. It involves work from the client team, your consulting partner, and Infor. And because of this coordination, it's something that can't be moved easily within a project schedule. So if we're doing a conversion or an upload, oftentimes if we're missing a day or 2 on the project schedule, we're running a little bit behind, we can finesse that and we can flex it. With DMF, a delay of even a day or 2 could actually result in weeks of project delay because of needing those Infor resources to do their component. It's also not something that happens quickly. Those first initial passes are often 4 to 5 weeks in length, and there are pre-migration tasks that need to be done to set up and get the data ready. Then there's Infor's data migration factory processes, and then there are post-migration tasks as well. So the entire process needs to be highly coordinated, highly planned, and will probably take a significant amount of project time to execute.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, one of the challenges there is working through the first pass. It means that your initial conversion isn't done maybe as early on in the project timeline as your development team would like it to be done, because they're waiting on this conversion pass to finish before they can really start doing a lot of the interface development work. Now, one of the reasons it takes so long, it just comes down to the nature of moving data that was accumulated in a different, older legacy system up to Infor CloudSuite. Think about all of the different data that needs to move. It needs to fit the data integrity rules within CloudSuite, which are very strict. And this is data that was created in Lawson that maybe doesn't have a strict data integrity. It might even have been data that was created on an older version of Lawson. If you look at 2-3 years back, and that application might have worked differently, it might have had different checks at the time. All of this is going to fall out through the first pass and needs to be corrected. So the first conversion pass is going to identify all of the sort of data errors that prevent different transactions from cleanly migrating. Really, it's on the client then to go through and make some corrections to that data within the production Lawson system during the CloudSuite implementation project, so that way by the time we get to the mock go live, we're able to get a clean conversion with no errors, and we can get a good prediction of how long the go live timing is going to be. Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important to note that no matter how we decide to go about bringing data into a system, conversion is no free ride. There's work no matter which approach you take. It's important to consider what is going to get you to where you want to be, but there's no easy way, right?
Yeah.
All right. Another consideration is the approach to how we want to move the system into CloudSuite. Do you do what we like to call the Big Bang with all modules and all components all at once, or do we do a phased approach where one piece goes live followed by another? In the past, the majority of our CloudSuite projects were phased by suite. And this had to do with the fact that the product was still relatively new. Some areas were more mature than others. And it also allowed minimal change and impact to the client team at any given point over the project. Mm-hmm. As the CloudSuite offerings have matured, that is starting to shift, and we're noticing more and more clients favoring this Big Bang approach where we bring all the suites live simultaneously. There are some real benefits to approaching a project this way. One of them is the fact that it limits the amount of time that your organization spends in project mode, and it brings a priority to the effort to get everything into the new platform all at the same time. I think one of our largest benefits to approaching Big Bang is the cost savings that come along with it. It will allow you to have a shorter project. It reduces the fatigue that a client team feels by being in project mode for a little bit of a shorter time. And it also avoids some of these interim interfaces that become necessary. If you're moving HCM, for example, first, there are interfaces that will have to be developed and stood up and then maintained in an operational status for a year or 18 months while that next piece of the project gets ready to deploy. And that can be really challenging, not to mention it's an investment in some development time and operational labor that doesn't really have a long-term payoff. It's just a temporary crutch to get us to the next phase. Also, if we move and go live with that Big Bang approach, it allows us to decommission that legacy system earlier. And we don't have that hybrid environment of part in the cloud and 1 foot left behind for a while. And then it gives us an opportunity to take any optimizations, new modules that we want to implement, and put those in a later phase, which can come sooner. If you're implementing your HCM system and the team wants to also bring performance and goals in, but we don't have the bandwidth, implementing HCM then FSM could mean that that piece of optimization doesn't come for another 2 years down the line. Whereas this gives us a window to bring it in sooner and get the most investment out of the system.
Sure. Now, Big Bang isn't for everyone.
No.
Because it can put a lot of strain on an organization, particularly the client's IT, which needs to support every area of the project. If your project requirements are more transformational in nature, if there's a lot of business process change going on, if we do want to encompass some optimization, perhaps adding some new module functionality along with the core implementation, phase might just be more digestible for a business, and it reduces some interdependencies or linkages where a slowdown in one area of the project can cause great effects across the rest of the project in a Big Bang.
So as we're seeing this trend shift a little bit to a Big Bang approach, something that is coming out of that is this increased focus on a phase 2 road mapping. So there are certain opportunities that we have over the course of an implementation to identify the items that would be optimal to bring into a next phase. And those could be things like de-scoped items. Perhaps we had functionality or even whole modules that as we planned out the project, we realized needed to be removed from that initial scope so that we could make a deadline or keep within a budget. Also, low priority issues that maybe were not impactful to our go live, but would just enhance user experience. Those are items that could be moved into a future project phase. And also, as we close out that initial must-have technical development, there's going to be a substantial list of items that could not be included in that initial go-live. And those are all perfect candidates for a phase 2 project where we implement those and bring even more investment into the system.
Yeah.
So anytime we do one of these projects, one of the areas that tends to surprise clients is the amount of time that needs to be invested in project testing. This is very different from what you would experience in an upgrade, where the bulk of the testing can be driven by your IT staff and then just bring in those business users for a final check the box, yes, it works. With CloudSuite, what we're really doing in testing is testing this particular instance of the system. So we're not looking for bugs in the way that you might think of testing looking for system bugs. We're looking to see, does the way that we've configured the system match the business process functionality that your team needs? And that has to be driven by business owners. That can't be driven by the IT staff who doesn't know those processes in and out. So it can be weeks and weeks of investment for those business team members who need to be a part of the project. And one of the great advantages to CloudSuite and the approach to testing here is that that investment doesn't just give us testing time, it also gives us training time. Because we aren't seeing as many system bugs, this gives an opportunity for that core project team to gain familiarity. Every time they go in the system to test, they're going to be going step by step through a test script that leads them through the business processes. That's gaining exposure to the system, familiarity with how their processes work in CloudSuite, and ultimately yields a large return at go live, where we see users more familiar with a system than they could possibly be by just a one-time go through and then some classroom training. Typically in a CloudSuite project, we're going to see several phases of testing. That first phase of testing, unit test or conference room pilot, is really all about testing out our design. As we move into system integrated testing, this is looking at the end-to-end business processes, testing all of our development items, making sure that the system is going to look and feel on go live day one the way we need it to. And then there's an element of performance testing to make sure that we can accommodate the volume that the system's going to have put on it. And finally, user acceptance testing, where we bring in some individuals outside that immediate project team, let them have exposure and give some feedback to the system as well. Another important trend we're seeing in CloudSuite is a renewed focus on organizational change management. We've mentioned several times, this is often a transformational project for an organization and can also be an opportunity to leverage changes to business practices. So that comes with challenges in itself, and it's important early on, beginning in planning, to take the time to prepare for the inevitable resistance that's going to come, to plan for responses there and how to approach it as a project team and as leadership. Along those lines, something that we've been finding great success with on recent implementations is doing these quick knowledge checks. And these are basically a way for our team to ensure that the training we're delivering is meeting the needs of the team there at a client site. These are quick little checks given at the end of a training session that give us feedback and focus on key system functionality that we want to make sure is absorbed by the team.
Yeah.
It also gives us an opportunity to retool, and if we find that an area of training is just falling flat, we can adjust and redo the way that we're approaching it with the team ahead of getting into that final end user training where it's organizational wide. Exactly.
This gives us a way to assess the effectiveness of the training, get ahead of any problems with the training, maybe by taking a different approach, using a different training avenue, and really is a metrics-based approach to ensuring the readiness of our team for go live.
Exactly.
Yeah. For example, quick knowledge check. If you remember the 4 biggest challenges to CloudSuite implementation we highlighted earlier, send them in an email to questions@rpic.com. Last thing I want to talk about today of our Infor Thought Clouds is some of the work that goes into implementing Global Ledger, the next evolution of Infor's GL. You've probably learned already about a lot of the advancements with GL in Infor FSM. Has a greater number of dimensions, which are customer defined. You can set up multiple calendars and reporting bases, and there's so much flexibility. It behooves an organization to take some time to really explore what is the best fit for their structure within the capabilities of the new Infor GL system. And sometimes this is a bit of an iterative process. Sometimes we'll work with a client who has a structure in Lawson, and they understand what the pain points are and what they're looking to achieve, but it might take a couple of approaches to design to really land on what we think is going to be best for that organization. Now, of course, that can take some time, And we don't want to be under the constraints of an Infor CloudSuite implementation project whilst we're working through that iterative design. So one of the things that we've done is we've broken out some of that work to be on a separate timeline. So we've worked with several customers now on an FSM GL Sandbox, whereby before beginning the full Infor FSM implementation, we'll take one of our instances of CloudSuite, or if the client's already been provisioned, we're able to use their instance. We'll do some sample GL setups, a limited data conversion, and we'll see what it takes to bring data in, and then how do we get that data out. Take a look at some of the reporting that's available. And we'll really work with a client to maybe trial out a couple of GL designs, so that way they have confidence that they found the right one and there won't be any delays when we actually launch the full implementation.